Good morning, folks. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Pete Dalton. A lot of you probably know Pete either from working with him or potentially from seeing him on other webinars during this, especially during this time of COVID madness. Pete's been quite popular and has done a good few bits of work, which is probably because he knows what he's talking about. And any of you who have been with us for these webinars so far probably know that that's one of the key things we wanted from these, was that the people presenting them and the people providing value for you actually live and breathe what they do. They're practitioners, they know what they're talking about. We think it was the best way to kind of make sure you're getting value from these. So we're looking forward to Pete's presentation. It's going to be a bit of a technological tango, as I called it to someone last night, in that I am controlling Pete's slides while he delivers the presentation. So I won't bore you with the detail as to why we've had to do it that way, but we have. So hopefully it works well. Hopefully the value is still there, and Pete and I can tag team well enough to make this work. I'm going to put a poll live real quick that we're keen to get your answers on, so we've kind of a feel for who's in the room. So that should pop up. You might let us know kind of who you are and what you work in. Hit other if none of them fully apply. Perhaps more than one applies to you, so just use the other there if you need to. Just I get for some of the usual homework, please use the chat window to ask questions. We'll be monitoring that as we go through the presentation, and we will be able to bring things to Pete if it makes sense to during the presentation, or we can wait till the end where we will have a Q&A at the end as usual. So but keep the questions coming in as you think of them and as they come to you, and if some of them make sense to jump in with, we will. Do actually let me know in the chat if the sound and the video is working fine for you. There'll always be people maybe with connections on their end, but I'm keen to make sure that it's working from our end, because that's all I can control. So let me know. I think the topic of today's session is quite an important one, looking at event management and incident management for events. I always kind of liken risk preparedness and emergency planning and incident planning to when I used to train lifeguards, and I used to always teach that we hope they are skills that people are confident in but never have to actually use. And I kind of view our work on emergency planning and incident management and things like that the same way. I want the confidence that we've done a good job and that we have plans in place to deal with a range of likely eventualities, and then I genuinely hope we never have to put them into practice. If I die without ever having had to put those into play, I'll be quite happy. I feel no real need to implement them in the real world if I can avoid it. So I think what Pete's going to bring us through are some kind of best practice international approaches. There are models, there are tools that are established and proven and that we know works. I'd imagine we'll probably hear the word interoperability quite regularly, because when it comes to incident management, that's what all this stuff boils down to, is how we all integrate together and deal with any given incident. And that's what, primary response agencies with the event management team that's in place itself, and kind of how they all dovetail together, hopefully talk the same language, and are able to effectively deal with an incident. So we're looking at about 68%, it seems, are event professionals. We've got 5% from the police, 20% other, and some in private security, Pete. So a lot of general event professionals. One last thing before we get going, of course, I want to give thanks to Paul Griffin and the guys in Actavo Events for supporting this series as usual. We are delighted to have them on board. We enjoy working with them. We enjoy that they support the series, and that they give us that support actively. They've given us a couple of presenters too who've done some really good sessions. So we're delighted they're on board. I'm not sure if Paul or any of the team from Actavo are in the room today, but they're usually not too far away, so they could be here. Pete, I think we're just about ready to kick off with this, so I'm going to share. I'm going to get that first slide up. I'm going to turn my camera off. You can pop in and take over, and hopefully this merry dance we're going to do with me managing your slides will work out quite well, and the session will work for people. I'll talk to you in a while.
Thanks, Mark. I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. As said, there's been some ICT issues, probably a state actor trying to do some cybercrime, but who knows? But thank you very much for joining. Great to see so many people dropping in. I've seen Red across in Canada, in Vancouver, so that's probably 3:05 in the morning. So he may be in the steam town of Vancouver having a beer. I've seen Alan from Australia, so he's late at night. So we really are cutting across the time zones. People from New Zealand, all over Europe, great to see. Also see that the poll indicates there's a bias towards event professionals, which is fantastic. There were about 6% police officers, private security, and some military. So quite a wide cross-section, and for me, that's what's really important. So what I'll do now is just tell you a little bit about myself. So Mark, just give us a couple of clicks on the clicker. So first of all, I've recently left a career in the UK police service. So I've just retired. I know I don't look old enough. I'm now a full-time private security and incident command professional. My current deployments mainly are with the National Centre for Spectator Sport Safety and Security, which is a US agency affiliated through the Department of Homeland Security, who delivers the Interpol International Sport Safety and Security Training Program, a real mouthful. So that's the major command training package for international commanders who will be working on Olympics, the World Cup, and major sporting events. And to date, we've trained 58 countries, and that grows by each syllabus session. I'm also the lead mind over matter consultant for Incident Command and Protected Security, working on projects across Europe, major sporting events, large crowded space, counter-terrorism, preparing for a master's program. I am a counter-terrorism security coordinator in the UK Police Service, or I was. What that means is I have experience of minimizing and managing threats to large-scale events. A specialist firearms commander and incident commander throughout my service, commanded events such as the Royal Wedding in 2018 in the firearms capacity, the D-Day 75 celebrations last year, and a number of large-scale events. And as part of my deployments, I get to go around the world doing presentations like this, so it's not all bad. On to the next slide, please. So this presentation, we're going to talk about several key areas. Just before I make a start on that, we're not going to discuss anything that's official, sensitive in UK parlance or above. So all the information I provide is taken from open source case studies, it's taken from documents that you can read, and there's no official secrets being discussed. None of the tactics we'll deploy are sensitive, and any of the stuff we're talking about, I'm free to engage with you and take questions on. I'll take questions towards the end of the presentation. I know there's a lot of people dialing in today, so if I can't get to answer your question during or at the end, do connect on LinkedIn, send me an email, and I'll get back to you within the next few days to answer any points. So today we're going to talk about the event management team. When I say that, I'm talking about private event professionals, not police, fire, ambulance, or military. So we're going to talk about the event management teams. We're going to talk about event planning, planning cycles, and project managing planning for large events. We'll get into an important point, which is the event management plan and contingencies. Now, this is really an interesting issue around the world. The event management plan, in most cases, is the responsibility of the venue, the event organizer, and private security professionals. So if we look at the UK Green Guide, for example, which is an international guidance document, that would say that if you like, the venue owner is responsible for safety policy. They should deploy a accredited and competent safety management structure. Most of you would know the term a safety officer or a security officer. The stadium or event should have an operations manual, and then each event should have its own event management plan supported by contingencies. We'll talk about, on the next click, the transitional moment. This is when your event management plan goes into incident command mode, normally because of a high profile major incident or something that's so significant that your event management plan cannot keep operating. We'll then move into incident command. When I say incident command, I'm talking about generally blue light services, police, fire, ambulance, military, depending on the constitution or the judicial arrangements in the host country. And interoperability, I will keep saying, I can never spell it, but that is how event management professionals, i.e. private security, works with blue light services and the military. Working together is so important in responding to our incidents. If we don't work together, we can find any number of case studies where that hasn't gone so well. So just change slides. Before I go through some of these UK attack incidents, I'll just paint a picture. A lot of my work is around counter-terrorism around the world at the moment, and you'd have to live in a box not to have seen the increase in terrorism generally over the last probably 10 years or so. What we've seen since really 2014, or specifically September 2014, there was an Islamic State propaganda lead, Al-Adnani, who did a seminal speech in 2014, encouraging people not to try and travel to Syria or Iraq, primarily because they were losing the land war to military forces, but to mount low complexity attacks in their home countries and not to travel. That was September 2014. The speech is online, and if you're interested in counterterrorism studies, it's well worth a read. It's just a few paragraphs, but it talks about not traveling to, if you like, Iraq, but mounting low complexity, low sophistication attacks in your host country. That started almost immediately. So there's a massive uptick in attacks. So most people will be aware, we've got some Australian colleagues, December 2014, the Lint cafe attack in Sydney. We then moved forward into January 2015. We had Charlie Hebdo and the Jewish supermarket attacks in Paris, an international manhunt that cut across Belgium that went on for several weeks. Into March 2015, Brussels airport, a explosive attack, and then an attack in the city. We go forward to a large event for our French colleagues in June the 14th, 2016, which was obviously the Nice vehicle as a weapon attack. Just before that, I forgot to mention, we had Stade de Paris, which was a huge attack on November the 13th, 2015, started at the National Stadium where Germany were playing France, moved into the theatre district, ended up in the Bataclan Theatre, translated into an international manhunt. That was perhaps the most complex attack of recent times. We then jumped forward past, like I say, Nice, into the Berlin market, a Christmas attack. And then the UK started to have a really bad year in 2017. Just to run through these pictures, the top left is March the 22nd. Khalid Massoud in a hire vehicle drove across Westminster Bridge, killed 7 people, injured 50, jumped out and killed by stabbing PC Keith Palmer on the forecourt of the Houses of Parliament. That was on March the 22nd. On May the 22nd, another seminal attack with the top right picture, deliberately quite small. Salman Abedi, a Libyan national who'd moved to the UK several years before, was a trained pro-Libyan fighter, detonated a suicide device at the Ariana Grande concert on the egress phase. That has now translated into a duty to protect piece of legislation that's coming shortly, also known as Martin Law. Bottom left, another IED attack. That was Parsons Green. Hamid Hussein, a Iraqi national who'd moved to the UK unlawfully a few years before, detonated a device by timer. It didn't fully operate, but injured 50 people. Centre, more recent, 2nd of February 2020, Sadesh Aman in Streatham High Street, a knifing attack, wearing a fake suicide vest, stabbed 2 people, shot by the police. Of interest, both him, Salman Abedi, and Hassan Hussein, and the next 2 people I'll talk about, were of interest to the security services. Bottom centre, the most recent, June in Reading, in my force area, Kahiri Sadala, a knife attack, killed 3 people, wounded further, and was prevented from doing far worse by the prompt response of police within a few minutes. Again, he was recently released from prison for a terrorist-related offence. To the right in the centre, you may recognise that as being London Bridge, Fishmongers Court, from the 29th of November last year. Usman Khan, a recent release from prison, a knifing attack, wearing fake suicide devices, promptly shot by the Metropolitan police officers, and a wider attack prevented. The bottom right, again, a vehicle as a weapon attack. That was June 19th, 2017. Darren Osborne, a right-wing terrorist, drove a vehicle into Finsbury Park Mosque. So that's just a brief history, and I can go to pretty much any of your countries, I think, from looking at the web, and find a terrorist attack in recent times, and most of those will have been what we would call trade, low complexity, low sophistication, primarily around at the moment improvised explosive devices, edge weapons or knives, or vehicle as a weapon. Those attacks can be mounted by anybody with no notice, with little planning, and what we are seeing is the number of attack plots that are being disrupted generally involve more than one threat actor and more complex means. When they have to stretch their capability and their intent, that is when they start to use electronic communications, and most of developed countries now will be all over that without saying too much. So just change slide again, please, Mark. This is just a snapshot of the UK threat levels. I can go to your countries again and find similar product. As event professionals, it's worth being aware of what your current host country threat levels are. You can generally get them on open source websites. In the UK, we can go into MI5 or NACSO or CPNI or a range of sites you may have heard me talk about in more specific terrorism presentations. But find out the threat levels, have a look at them. That's just general guidance for you. In the UK at present, we are at substantial, which means an attack is likely. That was changed from severe on November the 4th last year. It had been at severe since September the 2014, with the exception of 2 periods of critical, which was following the Manchester attack in May 2017 and the Parsons Green attack. You can see the definitions there. What I'd also encourage you to look at, if you look at various event management documents, there is a corresponding level of protective security that you should consider at your events. So one of my good friends online, I can see, or two of them, Pete Downing and Dave Parker, both safety officers from UK football clubs, they would know that if we were at critical, they should deploy exceptional security measures. If we are at severe or substantial in the UK, they should deploy enhanced security measures. And if we're at moderate or low, you do what you always do as part of your safety, security and service operational plans. Just change slide again, please, Mark. Before I go into the list, we're going to go into an exercise today to practice some event management principles. The scenario we'll talk about, I'll go through the context in a few slides' time, and it relates to a major international celebration in your host city. We'll assume that your host cities are major host cities, maybe in a capital event on a greenfield site. So what I'd encourage you to think about just briefly, feel free to put some comments into the chat to help me and Mark along, but just start to list the sort of people or roles you would want to see as part of your event planning team. And we'll start off with a focus being event management professionals, i.e. private security, not police, fire and ambulance. So just start to put in some comments in there, be interactive, let us know who you think should be part of that team. Perfect, you've started typing, which is great. Just click the first two, please, Mark. Okay, so straight away we would recognize an event requires an event organizer and generally a promoter and a producer. They should form the bedrock of your planning team, because at the end of the day, they're going to carry a legal, an ethical or a procedural responsibility for safety, security and service at that venue. Whichever country you come from, you'll have different judicial or constitutional responsibilities, but in most cases now there is a local authority or a licensing body who will issue something similar to a safety certificate. And you may have heard the excellent presentation by Ian Mixter in May, probably, the time goes so quick, where he spoke in detail about UK safety licenses. Click 2 more times, Mark, please. So joining this crowd, we would expect to see a competent accredited person. In the UK, we tend to refer to those as a safety manager. They will be operationally and occupationally competent at what we would call MVQ level 4, which is a management qualification for their stadium, or at least working towards it, or if not, bringing previous military, police, fire, ambulance experience with them. There is going to be a police commander and team for a large event, and they will seek to plan alongside you, but they'll be responsible for different things. And we'll come on to how those responsibilities are discharged in a few slides' time. Click a few more times, Mark. In the UK, there's a role called a counter-terrorism security coordinator or a counter-terrorism security advisor. They are separate but distinct roles, and they will provide protective security advice so that you can minimize and manage and mitigate threats to your event. They'll put layers of security in. It would be remiss of me not to mention the onion layers for Gary Jones if he's online, but we put layers of security in to buy time and space. And what we're seeking to do is to deny threat actors the opportunity to get near your event. We're trying to detect and deter them from getting close. And by having layers of security, we can build in time and space. Other emergency services, fire, ambulance, police, military, at a senior level, they will have their own responsibilities. They will join your planning team. Click a few more times, Mark, please. You bring in your stewarding managers. Now, for the event we'll talk about today, it's not in a recognized venue, it's a greenfield site. So in these situations, you will bring in probably private security companies and professionals. So again, the earlier you engage with them, the better your planning cycle will be. They may choose to bring in key supervisors, whether they are functional or geographical. A functional commander might be a medical service. A geographical commander might be somebody in charge of gate 1 on the east side of your venue. But it's an important distinction. 2 more clicks, Mark. And again, this group isn't, it's not fully exhaustive, hence the catch-all at the end. Transport coordination, other agencies as required. This will continue to grow, and it will start a planning cycle. Just do the next click, please, Mark. How you plan is generally to a format. The UK Police, Fire and Ambulance work to the Joint Emergency Services interoperability principles, more to follow, but that follows a cyclic planning process. Gathering information, assessing risks, considering powers, developing plans, take action and review. Whichever course we do around the world, there are various models of this. The key features are you have to understand your event, you have to do a threat assessment, it's an ongoing process, it's multi-agencies, and after the event you just keep recycling, keep reviewing, keep debriefing. And many countries have an almost identical format. Over in the States we use the Planning P, over across in Australia we use a system called ICCS, but they say and do the same thing. So I guess to yourselves as event professionals, what's your planning agenda? What system do you use? How do you show a audit trail? How do you keep records? Don't give me answers now, but they are things that you should be looking to think about. The next schematic, deliberately in small print when it comes up, is an example of a planning meeting that I chaired as part of a role wedding planning in 2018. If you've got 2020 vision, you will see that that follows the national decision model process, and it involves all of my functional leads for a specialist large-scale international firearms operation. When I plan events, my planning meetings are ongoing. I keep records. There's a project management process. Everything is audio recorded. There's maps, plans, and charts, all version controlled, and that is a science and a skill set in itself, because the requirement to show justification, planning, proportionality grows all the time. Click the next slide, please, Mark. So, event management plans. This term you'll hear me talk about a lot, as will our Green Guide colleagues, and it talks about integrated safety, security and service, and the paramount need when you plan your event to consider all of these 3 S's together in tandem as part of a holistic plan. If you plan in silo, it goes badly wrong. Safety has got a legal definition under the Council of Europe's Integrated Safety, Security and Service Convention, talks about health and safety, slips, trips and falls in simple terms. Security definition talks about person-born threats, whether it's terrorism, criminal activity and malicious threat. And service is the most important, if you like, for the spectator or your fan experience, is making people feel comfortable, acceptable and welcome at your event, because all the work we all do is about putting a show on, whether it's sport, music, cultural, festivals. That's what we get out of bed for, and there's no point doing that if people can't come and enjoy your event. So that's the challenge, to consider those 3 S's. Do 3 clicks, please, Mark. So there's an absolute requirement. If you're doing a major international sporting event, we're currently involved in the preparations in Qatar and looking ahead for United 2026 in the US, your tournament bid will outline how you will achieve this responsibility. But it talks about the host country, the host city, the host venue, having an integrated safety security service policy. You should link to your host city wider local resilience forum or your local major incident plans. The advantages of and the need for interoperability are paramount. Interoperability and planning helps. That starts off with getting to know your planning partners through networking, through developing conversations, working through LinkedIn. But on the way to the disco is not the way to learn to dance. Do all your stuff in advance. Make sure you have these friendships, informal networks. It helps as you move towards game time. Click again, please, Mark. Now, the event management plan and contingencies, just to reinforce, this is the private sector responsibility. The event management plan will generally contain a large amount of information. More of that to follow on the next slide. The event management plan should also cover your reasonably foreseeable contingencies. And for an event, we'll talk through a number of these today. Things such as an event cancellation, a loss of services, bad weather, structural collapse, missing children, somebody with cannabis at the gates, some theft, a minor disorder, all the things that happen. The contingent should be the response to those, building up to more serious things such as serious crime, terrorism, and major incidents. That's the responsibility of the event management team. The instant response is through the blue light services, or in some cases, a military, and they will seek to develop their own emergency or operational plans at both strategic, a tactical, and an operational level. And they will dovetail and link in because they'll be part of the planning process. It may be that your planning sessions are chaired jointly by police, fire, ambulance, and the event organizers, and that's good practice. What I can say from years of experience is your planning meetings are not the only part of the planning process. There will be recce's, there will be further meetings, there will be functional leads, there'll be phone calls and lots of stuff going on. But the events management plan and planning process is where you'll draw it together along with the instant response. Click again, please, Mark. And just a statement here from the European Council's direction. What I would say here is I would signpost you to a 3 course. Again, I'm not affiliated to, but the promotion of safety, security and service at sporting events. There's a 3 online course. I know many of you will type up to say you've done it recently. It goes through these principles. It does take the best part of a day to do, but it does give you a great underpinning knowledge. And for those who like them, a free certificate for your CPD in major sporting international events. Anybody who wants to tender, bid for, or be involved in a major tournament, well worth doing. Change slide, please, Mark. The spectator journey. So see this, if you are a single city event, see this at how your fans, spectators and visitors will get to your event. They don't just arrive from park and ride and walk through Zone X. They will have gone through a deliberate planning cycle. One of our friends on here, I can see Roger Hook is online somewhere, but Roger used to talk passionately at Ascot Racecourse back in the day about people planning for Ascot back in June, maybe having tickets through the post at Christmas and planning their event all until June. And what that's saying is you've got the chance to influence your spectator. The moment they go online and buy a ticket, you can start to pass information about the spectator journey. We're not covering crowd management today, but if we were, we'd talk about DMIs, design, information management, ingress, circulation, egress. We talk about signage and all those details, but help the spectator get to you as they travel through your regional or national travel networks. They may stay in accommodation. They will certainly use public transport. A great piece of work by a consultancy for Wembley last year did a multi-nodal review of transport for major stadiums over a number of events, and it highlighted, in general, around 80% of people will use private transport, and that will generally go up for international sporting events. And they will use the trains, automobiles, get themselves to Zone X. Some may park, but they'll then go through your event structure. They'll go into Zone X, the last mile you may know as it at, and start to walk through your safety, security and service plans. Generally go through a layer of security, ticket check, may go through what's known as a mag and bag or a search regime, go through final search into your stadium and repeat the process to leave. But understanding the spectator journey is so important with regard to safety, security and service, but also for terrorism, crime, crowd management and all those reasons. So see your event, you can either stand on your stage and look out as far as you can see. Imagine you've got up in a satellite or an helicopter, or imagine yourself, which is a model I use, as a spectator who's just arrived in your country. How will I get to you? Where are my key touch points? Where do I get information? How do I get to your event? I will look at that journey both in terms of being a spectator, but part of my work is to look at that journey as being a hostile threat actor, and I'm looking for ways where I can target your event and then flip the mindset to counter that by putting protective security in place. Just change slides again, Mark, please. Okay, an example of this is the green guide. I could use FIFA regulations, UEFA regulations, other regulations. The green guide talks about the 5 layers. Zone 1 being the playing surface. Always a sad place for my Stoke City team. Zone 2 being where you sit or stand and watch the football. Zone 3 being where you nip out and get your hot dogs or your pies, the circulation area. Zone 4 being the area just outside the stadium, ideally where you can transit the whole circumference, meet your friends, have a final check, gather and move through. Zone 5 is the wider footprint, often includes the parking, etc. And then outside of that, Zone X. So those principles are replicated all the way through the planning process. Change slides, please, Mark. So the event management team, this is just a generic event team for I guess a large event it would be, but not a really remarkable event. Start off with the first click. There should be a strategic lead, whether it's a chief executive officer, an executive, strategic group. They should be responsible for, if you like, all aspects of safety security policy, resourcing, compliance, upward networking to government, to blue light services. They will be the strategic lead. They will have ultimate responsibility for that event. Underneath them, click please, there should be either a safety officer or more likely an event management team, widely attended, ideally in a venue operations center or a purpose-built control room, normally inside a stadium or nearby to an event, but that will handle all of the communication coordination processes and the liaison. Underneath that, you will then have the operational service delivery. This is private delivery. Just keep clicking, Mark, to save a few minutes. And you should recognize yourselves in these roles. I've left them quite broad and generic. There's going to be a transport manager or a transport coordination center for your event, linking into local, regional and national transport systems. There will be outer managers. In the police service, that would equate to a bronze or an operational level or a tactical level in some countries, but there'll be managers responsible for the delivery of your plan on the ground outside of your venue through those layers. Same again for managers inside, maybe by sector, which we'd encourage. There will be stage and production teams, there'll be catering and merchandise, there'll be response teams and medical response. That pretty much hopefully encapsulates a broad brush of private security professionals. Of course, I will have missed somebody out and I do apologize. That is the primary delivery of event management. Underneath those bottom line will be all of your stewards and resources. When the police, fire and ambulance come in, we will start off really linking into the safety officer at what I would call in the UK, the silver level. If I was in America, I'd call it the ops chief level. Over in Australia, it'll be known as the ICCS. So what I'm saying there is there's different models of command. The main recognized ones, I guess, is 4 groups. If I start in the West with America, they use something called the FEMA NIMS ICS system. If we come into Europe and the UK, most of us would use strategic, operational, tactical, gold, silver and bronze. Slight nuance in the UK, we swap over operational and tactical. Don't know why, it causes confusion at every session that I do. And then over in Australia, they have a system called ICCS, which is a similar system. And then there's military type police agencies will use a J1 down to a J6 prefix, but they're all talking about layers of command and what their roles and functions are. Just change slide, please, Mark. Mr. Gold, sorry, one more click. And really important, the blue lines is your lines of communication. The picture there is a radio, but that will include CCTV, phone lines, written communications, emails, public display boards, visual display boards, and every line of communication that you have in different layers. And that's a plan in itself. If you are delivering a major event, that communication structure is a large part of the plan. Developing the capability and capacity to run that event. So give that some thought, because how you talk and who you talk to, certainly in a fast time incident, is critical for event safety. Change slides, please, Mark. We're now going to talk about an event. The storyboard I've taken is from the D-Day 75 celebrations, which I played a part in the firearms and protective security last year. There's probably some professionals on here who did really good work on this, but in essence, I'll use this to highlight the number of agencies relating to an event. When this first started, it was part of regular D-Day celebrations in Portsmouth. This is South Sea Common. It's got a strong military tradition. The relevance to D-Day is a large part of the D-Day fleet sailed from Portsmouth to go across to France on June the 6th, 1944. So both Navy, Army, Air Force, strong ties. So this was going to be a 75th anniversary. Do the first click, please, Mark. It was going to be a public space event, and so the planning for that was going to be through the Portsmouth City Council, who always do a really good job, supported by police, fire and ambulance from the local district, so Hampshire, South Central Ambulance and the Hampshire Fire and Rescue, and a private event company called Vespasian were going to do those plans. That was going to cater for a crowd of up to 65,000 people. It would have been a large event, but then it changed later in the spring to the next click, please, Mark. Later, it was determined that Portsmouth would become an international centre for D-Day celebrations, and that Her Majesty the Queen and large sections of the royal family and pretty much all of Her Majesty's government would be in attendance. And that would now feature a large publicly broadcast international military tattoo, a commemorative event involving Navy, Air Force, Army, Marines, but more importantly, the real stars of the show, 2,500 actual D-Day veterans, and they were what the event was all about. That grew, so we start to talk about policing, fire, military involvements, and then Mr. Trump decides he's going to revisit the UK for the third time in a few years, and the event is going to involve a marine display. So we start to bring in Foreign Office, Maritime and Coast Guard, Departure for Culture, Media, Sport, Secret Service, and on the final click, 13 other heads of state. So that became the largest protective security operation outside of a secure venue in recent times, I would argue in the UK, in a greenfield site, and was put together really over 9 weeks. So whether you were public order, crowd management, medical, fire, ambulance, military, counter-terrorism, it was a huge challenge. All of those badges there were involved in the event management planning at different levels. All of those badges would cascade into further contracts. And it just gives you an idea of how busy and how big that can be. And it's not the sole responsibility of an agency. When you start to work like this, you're going to develop things that are usually known as a statement of intent, if you're following the green guide, or a memorandum of understanding. And this will seek to outline primary and secondary responsibilities for the delivery of the event. Change slide, please, if you wouldn't mind. Now then, so I've covered counter-terrorism. Let's go on to some normal threats. Just while I take a quick sip of water, see if you can recognize and type in any of these events, and I'll go through them in turn. There'll be a prize for anybody who recognizes the most wacky on there. And as soon as I see the first person type an answer, I will start talking again. So look at those events. Where do you recognize? And I'll go through, where are these events? I'll make a start. And the top left is, and I'm not a music person, Professor Chris Kemp, who I work with a lot, he just waves his head at me. Sorry if you like music, I just go to manage the crowds. Not really a music person. But the top left was the Libertines in Hyde Park in July 2014. There was significant crowd pressure and 31 injuries through poor crowd management, largely due to the barrier configurations. That's subject to a separate course in itself. The bottom left, Simon Jones, I think, or Simon James, excellent. Indiana State Fair, August 2011, a catalogue of errors with regard to a disconnect between event management and policing professionals. There was an entirely predictable weather alert for Indiana. It's in the Midwest. It suffers with bad weather, and over a few hours it was obvious and apparent there was going to be a significant storm crossing paths with the crowd at peak time. There were several opportunities for the event to be show stopped and evacuated. They weren't taken, and you can watch videos online. The main structure collapsed and killed 7 people, and it was a tragic event over in America. The top center is a terrorist attack. It's very small, so you might not see that, but yes, the USA, Raymond. That was the Harvest Music Festival in Las Vegas in October 2017. An active shooter got onto the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Hotel, and with 13 weapon systems and thousands of rounds of ammunition, and shot and killed 50 and wounded many hundreds of people. Led to an independent review, well worth a read. Just to skim through, Centre, new keyboard masters, cancelled on bad weather last year in the UK. Bottom centre is perhaps a very well-known one in the policing of football. That was Serbia versus Albania. Qualify for the 2016 Euros, October 2014, a drone overflight. It led to serious disorder between the players, first of all, and the game being cancelled. So drones are a popular subject. Bottom right could be anywhere. It's a tent on fire in a festival, happens every week. Top right, football hooligans. Sadly, England normally share a view in that. Just change slides, please, if you could, Mark. And if you just do 3 clicks for me. We're now going to talk about the need for you to do risk assessments. So the first part of that process is to understand your event, to establish the context, look at your event schedule, and then you need to risk identify, risk analyze, risk evaluate, and risk treatment. Now, this is a specialist subject in itself, so I'm going to go through really quickly. This model here is one that we teach through Interpol and around the world. It's ISO 31000. The reason we teach that is it's been used more and more by a wide number of police and private agencies, and it's an internationally recognized model. So I use this now rather than the national decision model because I can quantify threats and hazards, which are different to risks, and then translate that into a systematic process, which allows for consistency. Risk management is your coordinated activities. It's ongoing. It takes place from strategic down to delivery. And it's really important for you to get controls in place. One more click, please, Mark. And then your risk controls and risk assessment is your overall process. So you need to have a process that you can show where you can identify, analyze, evaluate, and treat risks. Those risks coming from threats or hazards. On the Interpol courses, we say threats are human born, it's malicious. Hazards are generally health and safety, slips, trips and falls, bad weather, etc. And we define the two, but we look at all threats and hazards under the same roof. Click again, please, Mark. How we then prioritize, and this is one of the ways we can then add some calculus to this, is to look at the likelihood, vulnerability, and consequence. So you can oppose or impose a subjective viewpoint. And I've listed here a list of the typical favorites for our event or a typical event. The point to note is when we combine likelihood, vulnerability, and consequence, the highest score there is 36, and I'll come back to that in a second. The lowest score is actually some of the terrorism offences are 8. What we've seen since 2015 is a big pendulum swing towards worrying about terrorism. In most cases, the threat of terrorism is lower than your normal crowd management, slips, trips and falls, and bad weather. It's amplified if you've got an international event, if it's an iconic location, if it's being pre-communicated, if there's a large crowded space, if there's soft measures and a big media audience and large members of police and military, it will have a higher level of threat. But most of your events, the terrorism threat is lower. So when you start to consider Martin's Law going forward and planning, bear that in mind. And you'll see there the scores go from 36 down to number 8. Change slide, please, Mark. How we prioritize then is quite simple. Just click the clicker twice. There's a scalar chart for those who like to have some scores, and you'll note that my highest score on the last slide was 36. So it was almost on the border of green towards yellow. So it should be very, very manageable for you. Another chart we often use is the 4x4 chart on the right. We don't mind whatever chart you use, but if you are going to use a process, that should be, if you like, the fundamental bedrock of your planning process. It should be ongoing, it should be communicated, it should be agreed. What I like about this model is you can put 5 event professionals in a room. You can have a production manager, a police officer, a fire chief, the safety officer, get them to score, compare their scores, and you can collaborate and cooperate in doing so. So it's just an interesting way of doing that. Jump forward. So just a reminder, these are the typical threats. The event management plan then, this key document, lots of clicks of this one. So do the first 2 if you wouldn't mind. So it's generally your overall plan to coordinate your resources to deliver your objectives. It's a policey format, but this is how you deliver your plan. And as I mentioned, if this was a major sporting event inside a football stadium that was Green Guide compliant, sitting above this, there would be an operations manual, a safety policy, and a safety structure. But for your event that's a one-off on a green space, your event management plan, it should include a list of components. I won't do the full list, but I'll go for some of the common ones. You need to have an event schedule and crowd profile. Crowd management, crowd science, we can spend weeks talking about it, but understand your crowd, understand your ingress, circulation, egress, capacities, flow rates, modeling, whether that's using simple maths, capacity calculations, or some of the software that's available. Do that for your event. That will help you to set your safe capacity, your entrance capacity, your normal evacuation capacity, or your normal egress capacity, and your emergency movement capacities. The event timeline, click again, please. I've grabbed this one, I think, from the Olympics. Each day, have a run sheet, have them color coded. This is very, very basic. This can be anything you want, but have a run sheet that you share each day. And when you have these plans, don't have them so sensitive that you can't share them. Have these agreed. And I know from the major sporting events I go to and work at, both police or private sector, at the start of the day, there's normally a very early meeting where the event management structure comes together, has that last foot on the ball, and goes through this process. 2 more clicks, please, Mark. Sitting alongside that, your command, control, communication, and coordination and intelligence, C4I, which is a military or an international term, and your key contacts. 1 more click, please. Make sure your plan covers that. Make sure it shows phone numbers, contact numbers, and it's up to date. When we go and do third-party quality assurance of major venues, I think every time, and that's been a lot of times in the last 6 months, I find cut and paste and people who've retired, moved on, changed jobs. Not ideal in a fast time situation, really not perfect if you're stood before a barrister as some sort of judicial review. So keep those plans up to date. Do 2 more clicks, please, Mark. We then talk about your transport plan, and that will be a detailed plan itself. Certainly if you're talking about national, regional, local, it will talk about transport routes, capacities. It will be a large document. So that's really important for you to understand. And it might be discharged through event control or for a really large event through a transport coordination center. 2 more clicks, please, Mark. You're doing a great job today, by the way. A safety and security plan. That's an example of the front page of my plan for the D-Day operation, a large part of the operation, but fully integrated with the wider services plans. 2 more plans, or 2 more clicks, please. The crowd management and evacuation plan. I've just done a screen grab here. You'll recognize that from the internet. It's Wembley. I use this one to show that that is just a picture, but it shows the periphery of Wembley. It shows the FIFA color codes. It shows major crowd flow routes. That's taken from a 200-page document in far more detail. But understand your event. One of the battles we're facing at the moment, and this is more of a battle with our international commanders, is there's a mindset, and it probably goes back to, I would suggest, things such as the Bradford Fire or the Hillsborough or Heysels, where police commanders tend to think about evacuation as their emergency movement. Your plan for emergency movements should cover both evacuation and lockdown or shelter in place, but all phases of evacuation, whether it's a full evacuation, a partial evacuation, a phased evacuation, an evacuation onto the pitch, a timed evacuation, and there's about 7 or 8 recognized options containing guidance. But your default position isn't situation happens, we evacuate the stadium. If you're operating in a major international or sporting event stadium that's Green Guide compliant, in most cases these days, if your spectators have gone through search and screening, they are generally safer inside the stadium. So if we cast our mind back to Paris, November 13th, 2015, those fans watching Germany and France were safer inside the stadium because there'd been 3 suicide attacks outside. If they'd been kicked straight out and gone to the centre of Paris, they'd have become caught up in the wider attack. So always have a starting point. What's really important with this is to understand how you plan, activate, and initiate these plans. And that will be a section in itself as your event management plan. 2 more clicks, please. Your incident reporting and response. This is a screenshot of a police set of terminology. You should have codes and color codes. Generally, you wouldn't say bomb over the radio for obvious reasons. We talk about a suspect package, a code 1. These are very easy to remember. They're very easy to use. When we work on major international sporting events or any event, let's not be proud, but let's agree common, simple terminology. Let's follow the radio protocols of communication using ABC processes and talk the same language. It's so important. 2 more clicks, please, Mark. And then maps and plans. There's always different versions, different scales. This is a headline map of the D-Day celebrations drawn to a scale of 1 to 250. There were many more maps around this, but do have at the very least a gridded map. The smarter maps will be in small A6 size handbooks. So Wembley, Ascot, events like that will have a small handbook. It goes in the steward's pocket. It contains all the cards, all the maps, fold out, very easy to use. The maps you see in the control room very often look great, but if you can't communicate it to your stewards on the ground, it's not going to work. And this features, along with communications, in pretty much every debrief that we do. So give some thought to it. And by the way, I'm not saying that's a good map. I'm just saying it's an example of a map. Change slide, please, Mark. Okay, you've heard this before in previous presentations, so just do all 5 clicks. This is really a safety and security planning cycle, and you'll see that it mirrors the joint decision-making planning cycle. And it's the same process. What we would do from a security point of view is understand the event. We would task out intelligence and look at your event profile. We then look to conduct a threat and vulnerability analysis using recognized methodology. And that would start well in advance of the event. So for the Royal Wedding 2018, our security operation started in April for the event on May the 18th. It starts well in advance. You then look at your operational requirements, and there's lots of good stuff on this. What we talk about for you is a flexible and scalable and proportionate plan based on your event. You do not, in most cases, need to go and put hostile vehicle mitigation around all of your venue. You do not, in most cases, have to search everybody. You do not, in most cases, have to deploy police and military. It depends on your operational requirements, that starts off by looking at what your assets are, what you are seeking to protect, and then using your host country recognized protective security guidance and building in layers of security. So the UK, we default to the Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure, or NACSO, the National Counterterrorism Security Office, and they talk about the recognised layers, slightly different to the football and FIFA and Green Guide. We talk about beyond the perimeter, at the perimeter, on the site, at your building, and then your asset, layers of security measures. But remember, proportionate, scalable, and modular. And when you do your planning and Martin's Law training, that will be covered in more detail. You then look to identify your protective security operation or options, talk to professionals, whether they are suppliers or contractors. Just one cautionary tale: beware of the person who comes to you as a contractor and says, I've got a guaranteed hostile vehicle mitigation system, for example, or I've got a guaranteed system that will defeat drones, for example. Any measure should be based on advice, it should be holistic, it should be written into your plans. And there are lots of people who will promise you all sorts of things. On the courses we run, we spend hours discussing this and some of the measures you can follow to look at the competence and credibility and the suitability of certain measures. But finally there, after the event, one of the most important areas, often forgotten, is to review the operational learning, have a debrief, and translate that learning into your next event, but share it through your event professionals and groups such as this. Okay, change slide, please, Mark. Our event, we're going to spend the second half of this presentation just doing some scenario management, and it is basic stuff. I will get you involved. I guess it's an immersive or a small-scale tabletop. The event we're going to deal with is going to be an international commemorative event. So imagine you're at D-Day celebration. You are the event management team or the role that you would ordinarily do. Start clicking through, Mark. The event will be an international event, 35,000 people. There will be some protected people coming, but you won't have President Trump and 13 heads of state. But you will have, for example, the local mayor, maybe a local government minister. The venue's on a public park, so it's a normal city centre, capital city park. So think of your capital city, think of a large green space. It will probably have previous events there that might be a footprint for you. There will be perimeter access and access control. So there will be a system of layers that will incorporate fencing, access control, validation, accreditation, and searching. It's going to be licensed by your local safety authority. Click again, please, Mark. There will be involvement through an event management structure, and you've brought in a private security professional. There's many of you online here. One of you's got the contract. You're developing an event management plan from scratch. You've got emergency services liaison and deployment of police, fire, and emergency medical services or ambulance. Click again. I think there's a few more on there, and your resources. So that's the context. Now, just see yourself as being on the day of the event, and we're in the peak ingress phase, and we're at the access control system. But most of you are going to be sat inside a venue operations center or a control room, and you're co-located with police, fire, and ambulance. But you've got the first pass at this. So there's 4 scenarios coming through. So just click those through for me, Mark. And these are typical scenarios. And I'll run through a bit more detail. The first scenario, and they are happening at the same time, and they're coming across your radio nets and by your phones and from updates from your stewards. There's a small number of protesters who are peaceful, protesting against the government minister who's attending, and they're sort of just being a nuisance in the crowd entrance area, displaying banners and just causing some concern, but they are peaceful and they're not being violent. There's a drone that's been reported, and it's flying over in a circular pattern over your venue. The operator is not in sight, and you're not aware of any event-based drone overflight. There are 2 drunken males who were being turned away for being drunk. They spat in the face of one of your stewards and claimed to have COVID-19. So that's the current one for you. And then finally, the 4th scenario is a person was seen to approach, on seeing the searching activity, has left a rucksack and quickly and quietly left the area. What I'd like you to do, just so I can get a sip of water, is look at those 4 scenarios and just type in, I'm not sure if there's a poll here or not, just type in what you think the most serious is, or even do an order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, I don't care, just to give yourself some thought. And then also have a think as to, in your own mind, how you'd respond to those. And I'll talk through each one in detail in a second, but just start to prioritize those as they happen on your venue. I can see number 4 coming in. So that's the suspect package, or the unattended rucksack, I should say. Some more numbers coming through, great. Okay, so it doesn't really matter which way you prioritize these, but what we're saying here is event management and incident response. You don't get to deal with one incident, have a cup of tea or coffee, and then do the next one. They happen simultaneously. There'll be lots of calls coming through. So what we'd expect you to do for a protest, we'd expect you to have this as a reasonably foreseeable contingency for most events. We'd encourage your stewards to have been briefed to that effect, and we'd encourage them to engage with protesters, to try and find out what the protest is about, to conduct an assessment as to what threat or hazard it poses, to point out any terms of entry. It may be that protesters allowed in your venue, it may be not. There might be a policy on banners or placards, that's over to you. But just to engage and speak If you've got body-worn video, start to gather that. Call for a supervisor, bring it to the attention of the police, and if the police are deployed there, they might have a dedicated protest response. But this shouldn't surprise you. It's bread and butter stuff. It happens at most events. At the Olympics in Rio, in Brazil, I was talking to a good friend who commanded that. On one occasion, in one square of Brazil, they had 34 different protest groups. So you will get protests. We've seen what's going on with Black Lives Matter recently. We've seen what's happened with environmental protests. We've seen what's happening with COVID. There is going to be an escalation and an uptick in protest at your events. The second one, the drone, I'll cut over. I'm going to talk about drones in more detail in a second. The third one, drunken males assaulting your staff. So if you were in the UK, you would have different levels of training for your staff. The SIA, the Security Industry Authority, provides specific training. There's an NVQ-based system, national operational standards for stewards. But generally, you would seek to have trained staff at your high pinch points or threat areas, such as searching. They've probably been trained to deal with conflict, both in terms of identifying conflict, doing the assessment, how to respond to it in a team or individually, how not to escalate the situation, how to de-escalate the situation. What you want to have there is an immediate response that can deal with the conflict and provide support to this steward who's had, if you like, spit in their face. Now, you're seeing as events start to open up, there's face masks, there's sprays, there's clear things, but this is probably a reasonably foreseeable scenario. And certainly I expect to see this in the UK from next Friday, when you have to wear masks in a public place to go shopping. So it's one to watch out for. And finally, the person discharging the rucksack in the queue. Again, we'll come to that later. But you just need to have a process. Nice to see you've taken part. Lots of different numbers there, so that's brilliant. So we'll go through then onto the next slide. And we'll talk about drones, because this is an interesting area for most people. And it's one that we spend days talking about as professionals. The first thing I'd like to do is hopefully reassure you that based on current research over the last number of years, the most likely use of drones at your events is going to be amateurs or hobbyists flying their drones who probably didn't know and want to get some footage. Next is probably the media, whether that's with consent of the safety team or without consent, or a publicity stunt or protest. That is the most likely in that order of priority currently in Western Europe, and it's reviewed all the time. The next batch is for security breach hostile reconnaissance. And it's a valid way of doing hostile reconnaissance, but if I was doing hostile reconnaissance training or penetration testing, I'll just go along and take a look. And most hostile reconnaissance, to be fair, is done by open source, online investigations on the ground, or compromising an insider threat. But yeah, a drone could be used. They have been used for hostile reconnaissance, and they do overfly large events. And then finally, terrorist attacks. Not yet seen in Europe. There has been one plot where it was attempted. I won't say the country it was from, but they lacked the capability and the intent to develop their plot. They were very keen to do so, but the moment they started speaking on the internet, the plot was disrupted. They had a knock on the door, and they're now serving a large prison sentence for that. Your basic response is to detect, track, identify, and defeat. The defeat bit is generally due at major international events where there is security service, military, police capability. You will not see a defeat capability at most of your events. There is an upsurge in private contractors and consultants and companies offering systems. Again, the same as with hostile vehicle mitigation. Be cautious about the systems. They are a growing sphere of business, but defeat is difficult. If you imagine the concepts of how a drone is controlled, but you can get involved in detect, track, and identify, whether that's using CCTV, whether it's using your stewards who've been briefed with a reporting system, whether it's using geofencing, whether it's using thermal imagery, whether it's using radio frequency, direct frequency, and any number of monitoring systems. You can do that. But the most important thing is to detect, track, identify, and to go through an assessment process. The pictures you can see, you probably recognize. The center left is the Venezuelan president, an attempted assassination. 2 drones didn't activate properly. The top right is a large music festival with a drone over the top. The bottom right I've spoken about, Albania versus Serbia. There are many more examples of this. The bottom left is a capability by Skywall, which is, I always call that as a giant Nerf gun, but it fires a projectile up to 100 meters. It looks a bit like the rugby ball that you throw on the beach with a net on it. It can bring the drone down in certain situations. That's deployed at a large number of tier 1 airports and starting to spread into the police and military domain. But detect, track, and identify, but be reassured, the most likely thing is going to be the top 3, which should translate into you don't need to evacuate your event. Do the next slide, please, Mark. This one, if anybody recognizes this, it's a small prize. It's a music festival in Europe. This is just an example of a very quick screenshot when we were consulting across there, talking about drone risks. This is very, very easy to understand. The blue bit in the center is the main stage area. That is the asset you are wishing to protect from drones. The red circle is out at 500 meters. Although drone technology it's developed since I've been talking to you, it's developing all the time under the principles of Moore law. Generally around 500 meters is a sensible distance for drone flight, primarily because operators generally want to see and have first-person view. They don't need to, but they generally want to. So then 500 meters, that's a key area for you. The areas in pink, they are areas of large campsite and infrastructure. So the type of areas at that particular fest, Alan Wilson, well done, top of the prize for you. It's Roskilde in Denmark. The pink areas are perhaps the most high risk area for drone overflight. And then the orange is 1,000 meters. Now, clearly, you can launch a drone attack if you're a terrorist from another country. We were over in Qatar, September the 14th last year, first day of the course. I was doing this very same presentation talking about drones, and they hadn't been used by terrorists when the Houthi rebels in the Yemen sent about 15 drones into a large Saudi oil field about 70 miles from Qatar, causing an international incident and a spike in oil prices. That requires top-end state actor, without casting aspersions, Iranian activity to destabilize the oil flows. You're not going to see that at your event in most cases. Things to be worried about are drones that are carrying a payload, something that's not constructed into the drone, and fixed wing at speed. I'll be far more concerned about a fixed wing model aircraft than a typical DJI Phantom type drone. Do the next slide, please. So, okay, another acronym that we would teach, counter UAV principles, Dalek. Regarding that then, so do the clicks, please, Mark. Detect, first of all, I've mentioned, assess the situation, locate the pilot if you can, direct a response, engage and consider. That's your most likely. Your most likely response is going to be stewards and security. So accurate radio communications to a grid map, having a response in place. And just to stress again, a drone overflight is in most cases not going to be grounds to cause an evacuation. There's a comment there from Simon, just to emphasize that point. And yes, a drone can stay over the top, but a drone can hurt you in two ways, by carrying or disseminating a payload or kinetic force. So if you are in there and you can see a drone flying over your venue, you will probably have had signs in place and search in place. I would hope you've got pre-recorded messages. You would seek to deploy stewards to engage, but you seek to reassure people. You want to get people to ignore the drone and hope it go away. If it's an obvious threat, such as the Albania versus Serbia game or the Venezuelan president attack, that's going to be slightly different, but your response will vary accordingly. Go forward, please, Mark. Perfect. Jump forward for the next slide. So directing your response, and we'll see this again from the perspective of event security stewards, but it also applies to police, fire, ambulance, and military. It's most effective. Do the first click, please, Mark. Your initial response is so important. We talk about, certainly when we do hostile reconnaissance training, the 3 Ps. You can have 4 Ps, you can have 5 Ps, have what you want, but this is simple for people like myself to follow. The first one is the presence or placement of where you put your security service professionals. Is there a reason for their deployment? We all know that you're going to cover gates, search, exit points, crowd monitoring, etc., but have a deliberate placement of your personnel. The second P is the purpose. Why are they there? What are they achieving? How does that link into the local plan at ground level? How does it tie into your event management plan? And the third P is the posture. or the professionalism of your stewards. If we're conducting hostile or criminal reconnaissance and your stewards are all gathered together, jacket undone, having a can of Coke, not watching, that places a different perception than people who are engaging with the crowd, being friendly, welcoming, checking, passing information. Terrorists and criminals hate being spoken to. When they're conducting their threat activity, if you just say, good morning, sir or ma'am, can I direct you to your seat? Show me a ticket, let me help you. They start to twitch. And when you're deploying things such as behavioral detection teams and other covert measures, you will spot them. So by engaging staff to be part of a service, that's really important. Then resourcing and training. Have you got the right resources in the right place? Do they tie into an event management plan? And what is their training and accreditation? And if you are going to be the event safety professional, understand the capability and the capacity of your teams and make sure that they are scalable and flexible and can do what you'd expect them to do. Remember tactical deployment, or how you put people in as part of the plan. If you get those 3 principles right, you can manage any scenario. Do the next click, please, Mark. And then when you've got the location right, how you direct that response to locate, to assess and get your initial and secondary actions in place quickly, calmly, is really important. And what I would always say when we're planning large events and dealing with our Interpol commanders is a major international event, the events that you do, it takes over your life. You don't go home at 4 o'clock and forget about Wembley Stadium or the Olympics. You are thinking about it all the time. And as event professionals, whatever your trade or role, you should be thinking about what your role is, what the likely snag points are, what could go wrong, what has gone wrong, what you would do about it, how you manage it, and pre-playing rapid scenarios in your mind. Now, there's lots of research into incident command that we can talk about for hours, but certainly if your staff are trained and competent and experienced, they can make recognition-primed decisions almost instantaneously. So the first line of your response is your safety stewards here, not quite sure where they're from, it's a Google screen grab, but stewards in a nice jacket with a number engaged to deal with your crowd. That's your first response. Click again, please, Mark. Followed by an accurate map. So you're trying to send them there to respond to a drone or a missing child or a disorderly customer. Tell them on the map where they're going. Give them a grid square. Deploy the nearest asset. Generally, you'll have communications. Hopefully, your communications are broken down into set talk groups, whether it's command, function, geography. But talk to them on the right talk groups, give them a briefing, and keep your comms on the radio so people can hear it. Having a reporting system so they can report back, really useful. Again, please, Mark, on the clicker. If it's a major incident, something such as methane, which I'll talk about in a few slides' time, to help to give a situation report so you can have the shared situational awareness. And again, please. And then supervision. Your supervisors and your first line supervision, whether that's police, fire, ambulance, military, or private security, is generally your most important. So how you invest in your supervisory training, how you train, reward, motivate, encourage, how you get them to work for you, buy into your values, share your passion, and treat them is so important, because they are the people who will be there supporting that. As we move to the transitional moment, which is the part when an event becomes the incident, we explain it just from this diagram here. So to the left, there are 2 principles of emergency planning. The first part is emergency preparedness, that talks about planning, preparing, preventing. That should form under your event management plan and be highlighted through contingencies. It should be considered based on a threat assessment. It should be tested and reviewed. And if you've got the time, or I would encourage tabletops, immersive exercises, live exercises, test and check your plan. When something happens, the bang, whether that's a stage collapsing, a fire, a big fight, or an explosion, that's when you're going to translate into the incident response, and you're going to seek to mitigate that threat. And that's where you go to respond and recovery. And that's generally where you'll start to link in more closely with police, fire, ambulance, and military. So go to the next slide, please, Mark. Fantastic. So I'm going to talk about principles of integrated emergency services management. In the UK, it is known as the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles. It's a real mouthful. This talks about co-location, both through planning, through all levels of command and at the scene of an incident or at a forward command post. It talks about communication, agreed language, simple plain speak, using codes as necessary, making sure we understand, coordinating our response between all agencies, roles and responsibilities, having a joint understanding of the risk and a shared situational awareness. The JSIP website pops up here. Again, some of you are sat over in America or Canada, so you would look at the Federal Emergency Management Authority's NIMS process. If you're over in Australia, you're going to use ICCS. In Europe, you'll have variations of this that's agreed through Interpol and Europol. The two models are the joint decision model, backed up by the methane model. These will get bigger on the next click. So the methane, back to the methane model. We'll start there, that's fine. So well, perfect, thanks, Mark. So the shared situational awareness, sorry there, just a click thing, is how you get a common operating picture, how we all understand the situation. This is trained to all of our blue light responders of any rank or role. Technically, you should be able to ask a PC, a fire officer, an ambulance medic, what this stands for. They would all generally know. And it's how you report back over radio to drive activity. If you practice and teach this, it's slick and efficient. There's no reason why the event management structures can't use this. So great stuff there to use that as part of your training. The next click is the joint decision model. And again, that just shows how you can do a shared understanding of the risk by quickly and succinctly gathering the information from the scene, assessing the risk, develop a plan, consider your powers, take action and review. And it's formed around saving life, preserving life. If it's a terrorist incident, you're going to seek to identify, locate, and confront the threat as a primary objective. But you're always focused on, if you follow JSIP or principles from around the world, saving and protecting life is your human right principle. Then treating medical casualties. Then you're going to seek to stabilize and bring order to the situation. You'll then be thinking about, if you like, investigation processes, coordinating the scene, and then seeking to return surfaces. But you'll always start about, how can I save and protect the most life? How can I neutralize ongoing threats? How can we coordinate activity? They are set priorities. You can have them on crib cards, you can have them to hand, or even better, on the next click, you can go on various apps. So this one is the JSIP app that we promote. You can have this on your laptop, your phone, your computer. It's fully intuitive and interactive. It will even let you upload the scene of an incident and fill in these forms. It contains all the guidance. You can do lots of stuff. It contains the whole program. So you can go to the JSIP site, excuse me, use the app, have it on your phone. Anybody can use it. More recently, the Action Counters Terrorism site in the UK have released their own app that follows these principles. So if you want to look at protective security, maybe you've done the ACT package, do that one as well. But also FEMA have got these apps, and a number of agencies have them. So these are great for mobile technology. They're great for crib cards and easy for fast time briefings. Change slide, please. And I can see that Matt's doing a JSIP presentation in a few weeks' time. So if you like this subject, well worth listening into. It's a key area for you to follow. So actually putting your plan to life, we've got different models, some quick things to think about here. First of all, Mark, just click your screen. The first one is you've got to deploy effective incident command. For a planned operation or event, this should be in place and good to go. If it's spontaneous, this will generally grow from a situation and work upwards from your first response. The second one is to understand the situation, that shared situational awareness using methane or your reporting systems. Setting your incident objectives, neutralize threats, save life, rescue, go for that order. That's your priority. It's not the time to have long discussions. Incident commanders, by either nature or nurture, tend to be very dynamic leaders, active leaders. And there's certainly people I've worked with on this forum today who just take command and they just do it instinctively. They will get things done. This style of leadership is different to management, where you're consulting, having meetings, discussing options. When things are going badly wrong, as the sirens come towards you and the blue lights start to flash, getting a grip and leadership are really important. Developing your plans. Hopefully you've got contingencies. I would hope you've rehearsed your plans. Most of your incident commanders are vastly experienced. They can do recognition primed decision making, and they can just put a plan in place, consider options, look at previous learning, and start to save life, rescue, neutralize threats straight away. Test a plan, both in terms of your mind quickly, But if you're planning and got time, test the plan out. Have the question. Some of the simple JSIP questions. What's going on? What could happen? What's our direction of travel? Situation, direction, activity. Simple questions to test your thinking, implement and review. Whichever model you follow, US, ours, international, you follow these processes. On to the next slide, please, Mark. Okay, then, so we're on time for a perfect finish, which is great. The final scenario we'll talk about. So imagine those 4 scenarios. The one with the unattended package. You've dealt with the protests, you've dealt with the drone, you've dealt with the drunks. Somebody's gone forward, taken a look at the rucksack. They haven't done a physical examination, but they've seen visually that it's got wires and a pressure cooker inside it. Now, you probably aren't going to be welcoming pressure cookers inside your advice. Anybody with a basic level of understanding would recognize that a pressure cooker is or can be a low complexity component, the casing for an explosive device. So think about the Tarnett brothers at the Boston Marathon back in 2013, 2 pressure cookers on a simple timer with wires filled with screws and actually low explosive from fireworks. We could take most of you into the local B&Q and make one of these very quickly. You can go online and find out how to. Pause to say, though, I wouldn't do that because somebody will come and knock on your door and take you away. But the point for training is it is so easy to make one of these devices, and a competent person can source some materials and make this in probably 15 minutes. So it is a low complexity device and something to think about. Most of the IS or Islamic extremism attacks, though, do focus on suicide-borne attacks. So something will go bang or pop and you'll respond to the casualties. But if you do find a situation like this, I'm interested in the next 3 clicks. So just click 3 times, please. Have a look at what your key priorities are. Look at your event management and incident command and how has this responded, because I would imagine you're going to treat this as being now a suspicious item rather than an unattended article. And identify your likely emergency movement, evacuation or evacuation. And also, if you're from a police background, a fire, ambulance or military, just throw up there what you think a sensible theoretical cordon distance will be. I say theoretical because there are 3 UK distances, but actually achieving that in the real domain operationally can be challenging. So give it some thought, throw some comments up so I can get a quick sip of water. We'll then talk through these in turn and think about the JSIP or the joint response principles and the content of our presentation today. So what are your key priorities? I would imagine that that's going to be about, if you like, taking action to save life and prevent injury. You're probably going to be thinking this is a malicious attack, potentially of some sort. Hopefully you'll be considering there could be a threat actor out there. You might be thinking it's part of a late attack, but hopefully you're thinking this is a key contingency that requires activation. So outline your priorities. Your priorities, I would suggest, are going to be around saving life, preserving the situation. There are some rules of the 4 or 5 C's I'll come on to in a second, but you'll be implementing a specific contingency. At this point, I would hope that event management and incident command at all levels, but primarily at the floor, the shop floor level, at the forward command post, are coordinating, co-locating, communicating, understanding the risk and taking key actions that we'll talk about through the 4 or 5 C's, depending on where you come from, and you're looking to take immediate action. The incident command, so military, police, fire and ambulance are working together with event management. If police are on scene or military, they're going to seek to identify and neutralize ongoing threat. There might be a capability of roll forward ground assigned explosive audience disposal or bomb squad, call them what you will, take action. Just like what was seen in more slower time at Parsons Green. But your likely considerations are regarding an emergency movement, and this will be informed by the assessment of that device. If you're following purist theory, the cordon distance for a rucksack or small device is 100 meters. For a small vehicle or large device, it's 200 meters. For a large vehicle, it's 400 meters or 1/4 of a mile. Think of your event size where you live and work. Draw in your mind 100 meters. Ask yourself, is it achievable to clear that quickly? Very often that's a no. 200 meters, even harder. 400 meters, generally not going to happen. So whilst you're Explosive audience professionals will give those guidelines. You have to operationalize that and generally cover from the view of a device behind solid ballistic cover is a starting point. But you then have a response. Go to the next slide, please, Mark. As part of that response, these are generic. The first one is to have a system in place. So this will bring up the 4 or 5 C's. But so in general terms, you want to confirm that you have a suspicious incident rather than unattended incident. I know here I don't have to preach to the converted. There are any number of bags left wherever you go. So have a look at the confirmation, then look at clearing out the public away from that device or situation to an effective distance. Communicate with your command structure for a situational update. Of course, be careful of radios in close proximity. Once you've cleared and communicated, cordon and control, and for secondary attacks, check out the area. Certainly if that's an obvious staging area or rendezvous point, check it out, but go through a process. The next thing is for your event, have a safer bag policy, have an access control policy. Look about, are we going to do X-ray searches or a combination of? When we talk in detail about high footfall screening, that's really important. Consider private explosive dogs or private security dogs. You may have heard me say before, if you've got these, don't disclose what their capability is. So if I come to you, they are often an attractor of the public. Peaceful members of the public like to talk to the dogs, certainly the Spaniels and Labradors. If asked, don't say the capability. It's a security dog. It's a safety dog. But when we talk about explosive substances, dogs have to be licensed, and they're normally licensed on around 10 of the most commonly available or current man-made explosives. So at the moment, you're talking about nitrate-based TATP homemade explosives. They can't smell or detect everything. They are not totally reliable. It gives you a source of indication. They have a fantastic deterrent value, but that might be your first response, followed by a ground assigned or a forward mobilized explosive team. And then finally, the 4 C's. And so in the middle, the HOT principles, which is a great starting point as part of an initial scene assessment. Is it hidden? Now, generally, if I want to come and target your event, I'm going to seek to find a crowded space, ideally iconic location, ideally at a soft checkpoint. And I'll probably, unless I'm going to self-detonate and do a suicide attack, probably seek to hide it briefly if there's a timer and then step off. If you watch the videos that are freely available of the Boston bombing, you can see both subjects place, move backwards, activate devices, and it's quite interesting to watch. Is it obvious? So would you expect to find this bag here? Is it a bag full of bottles of water that police have left? Is it a bag full of whatever? And then is it typical? So go through those processes. That will help you with your response. And then just go out to the next slide, please, Mark. So we've talked about event management teams. We've talked about, hopefully, how we do event planning. We've talked about how we go through plans and contingencies. We've had a look at transitional moments. We've done some very, very basic scenarios, and we've talked about incident command and interoperability. This, for most of us, is part of our jobs, and we all freely attend these webinars to take part. The plea from me is, one of the areas I'm currently involved in is trying to bring the world of Interpol and major international command at blue light level alongside private security. And by working together, training together, sharing together, we can make events more safer, security and service focused. There's any amount of training you can have. Consultancies like mine that I work for are glad to help. It's not a sales pitch today by any means. People who know me will know that I'll engage freely online and share information. But do think about how you develop your plans and think about all the principles of developing your plan, testing, quality assurance, training your staff, developing your staff. Because as we wake up from lockdown, events are going to be really popular. And as we will see, sadly, terrorists haven't gone away, criminals haven't gone away, protesters haven't gone away. They're using the time to plan and prepare, which is what you should be doing. We're now going to move to a question and answer. Just before we start that, I recognize there's loads online today. So if you don't get the question answered, send me or Mark an email. I will guarantee that I'll reply to you via LinkedIn or by email. If you're shy, that's absolutely fine. Or some people like to ask questions straight away. Just take the opportunity, throw some questions in. If I can answer them, I will. If I can't, I'll go away and find out.
There you go, folks. He used the word guarantee, so he will definitely come back to you by email if we don't get to your question today. Pete, just a thank you for me and an apology that my clicking probably wasn't up to par with your own clicking, but
it was perfect. It was perfect.
Listen, one of the things I think we should kind of jump into straight away, because it came up when you mentioned it and there was a good bit of debate. I'm not sure, did you spot it on the chat? It's just around code words. And I think there are a couple of schools of thought on code words at the minute. I think people in the industry seem to believe that if it's for, like, say a permanent venue with pretty much the same staff all the time and people constantly using the exact same code words have a place and make perfect sense. And then there was people in the room who maybe their experience is more greenfield site, moving from one event to another, and literally you could have one set of code words on a Saturday and another on a Sunday. So what do you think there? Is there a balance, and are code words more suited to those permanent venues who can set up structures, review them once a year maybe, but kind of keep them consistent?
Yeah, it's a great subject and very relevant. So what I would say on that is, if you are an event management professional and you are working at a regular venue with a trained staff, I would suggest that you use code words or instant reporting systems that are trained and developed. If you are working alongside police, fire, ambulance, military, you will be using code words in plain speech. Now, over my 30 years, I've been at events with different code systems, different reporting systems, different radio channels, and you can imagine what happens. So now what we advocate is part of our daring to sharing, as part of our event management and incident command, right at the start, let's agree on what's our reporting system, codes or not, mapping or not, and how we'll share information. So what's comfortable for you? What I would say, though, is obviously avoid there is a bomb at this location. I've got some sort of noxious substance. But by being accurate, by being brevity or short, and by being clear, you'll get better communications on the go. Most stadiums will have pre-recorded announcements. You know, can Mr. Sands report to the control room, or Mr. So-and-so, he's lost his keys, or those sort of things as well. So pre-recording is really, really good as well. So there's a balance to be had, but just make sure you can talk and share info.
Yeah, I think it links into one of my own pet hates on events that I know was flagged in the chat as well. And that's one of the issues around using code words, is that if you use plain speak, or, you know, as you said, if you said, you know, noxious gas or bomb, that, you know, the public might hear it, which feeds into my pet hate of people using radios operationally without earpieces, which absolutely drives me mad. A lot of the other things we do are made much simpler, and we have a broader range of options on how to do them if it's just 100% people are using earpieces, so there's no worry that the public will hear any radio comms.
Yeah, no, the earpieces that we're very, very strict on. Certainly, there's people alongside here who've been involved in sensitive operations, counter-terrorism, fire. You have to have an earpiece. An earpiece is really important. It's better for your operator because they can hear clearly, and it stops people listening to their communications. And I occasionally wearing earpieces, having good communications, and also body-worn video, but that's a subject in itself. But earpiece is really important if you can get them. And you go to some events where not all the stewards will have radios, so think about your capacity to deploy radios. Generally, I would expect all supervisors and people within a team to have them. Clearly, test your communications. If you're in a green guide stadium, there's tests 48 hours before and on the day, but test your communications. Expect your communications to fail at some stage. Be surprised. I will buy you a beer, anybody here, if you've got a major international event and communications does not feature in your debrief. I will buy you a beer if you pay for my air flights to come and see you. How does that sound?
I think that's a very good point. It's something we've had questioned by clients at times, because it features in our risk assessments that the main communication system, whatever it may be, and it is usually two-way radios, that goes down. And you get that question, like, how would that happen? Has that ever happened? Like, yes. And sometimes it only starts appearing in a risk assessment after you've had it happen and you realize how critical it is. Steve in the chat reckons that radio use without earpieces should be a sackable offense. I'm nearly there with you, Steve. I feel that strongly about the earpiece thing. And this is from a man I have dodgy ears from playing rugby, and earpieces don't sit well for me. But the risk of public hearing operational messaging, or a threat actor hearing it, if they're doing their reconnaissance on a regular event and they're able to overhear comms, they can be learning a lot, which is a legitimate worry. One other thing, Pete, that I just noted that came up early in the chat was around the NVQ level 4 that you mentioned. And, people were making the point that I guess we always make, that the NVQ level 4 is really geared around stewards in stadia and, what exists for just general events, or where do we all look for that? And I mean, the answer is probably what the answer always is. There is a bit of a gap at the minute. But again, NVQ, I did my NVQ level 4 many years ago. And I have to say, from an assessment perspective, whether it's level 4 or what level it's at, I found great value in someone actually assessing me live on an event. So personally, that being a level 4 didn't really factor into anything for me. The fact that someone with an awful lot more experience than me came to 2 events I was running and assessed me on them is something I got a lot of value out of. But I guess the point is solid, that generally speaking, it's geared towards Stadia and staff in Stadia.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And there's many different iterations and lots of different training providers out there. So I would summarize it like this. If you're going to do a major international sporting tournament, the Olympics, World Cup, FIFA, Stoke City versus Port Vale, a major football game like that, he says dryly, if you're doing a major international tournament, FIFA or UEFA or the Olympics will mandate that you generally follow the Green Guide. So that's going to translate into a similar package. What they'll want to see is your security managers at all levels are operationally and occupationally competent. Those who love the Green Guide, there's a few here, will know that the latest iteration, version 6, is now less prescriptive. It used to talk about the NVQ4 being mandatory. It now recognizes previous accreditation via prior learning, whether you've been police, fire, ambulance, or military, operational experience at the relevant level, provided that you've been assessed in a workplace, normally by, in the UK, the relevant agencies, and you've been signed off by your chief execs. I say this, and it's a rule of C's for me. At your position of command or management, you should be competent. First of all, operationally, occupational competent. The next thing, certainly for the work that I do, you need to be credible and confident. You need to be able to take command and understand your trade. One of my biggest bugbears in the police service over the last 20 years is the number of operational specialists has been watered down to more generic promotions, and we've lost the number of people. There's a few on this website who will probably agree, who've got a true apprenticeship. So myself, people online here have gone through every rank, every role, and dedicated our services to events and operations. So we know the technical detail. So understand the technical detail of what you're commanding. Fire service chiefs are exemplary at this. And then the communication. So if you're competent, credible, confident, and communicate, you can do the role. Don't get too hung up on having a master's degree or a BTEC, but just be happy that if you have to face a barrister, you can outline your training, your development, and your accreditation. And then we won't mandate what it is. But training and experience are really important.
Yeah, I think there are many routes to competency, I think. And it's interesting, an approach we take, I guess, in our business privately then would be that we would generally fill the main roles for events. That would be event controller and safety officer here in Ireland. And for a lot of the statutory agencies, the event controller is literally concerned with absolutely everything. Their priority at a given moment in time could be whether the gate is open to get the chip van in. So they really focus on the statutory agency side, and the primary response agencies focus on the safety officer role. Whereas we would have made a decision early in our operations that we generally won't have anyone in an event controller role if they haven't spent a lot of time in a safety officer role. So over time, we know that event controllers are thinking with a safety head on as well when we put them in place. Again, a bit similar to, like you're talking, the balance between experience, prior learning, qualifications, now that there are some qualifications. The other thing I'm always keen to remind people of is a lot of the people in this game who are really good at it would have done qualifications and study if it existed over many years. So the fact that they have managed to become really, really proficient at something that now has academic courses and qualifications in it doesn't mean they're any less proficient. So it's that balance. But people who live it and breathe it, and as you say, can take over, make decisions, and are, they're used to doing that. That's what's going to become critical in an actual incident. We can all think we're really well prepared, but someone has to take it take the bull by the horns and actually lead on the response, which is where you don't want to be found wanting when you're the person everyone's looking at.
Yeah. No, and developing that human capital, and it's a cheesy term, your ongoing development in slow time is down to you. And it is a great and important case for linking academic best practice into operational delivery. That's really important. Experience is always important, but any sort of skill, it's knowledge, understanding, skills, and behavior, and then operationalizing that. Other thing I want to say, which I don't want to start a Pandora's box here, but if your plan fails, that is not the person on the ground level fault. Brief people, briefing and walking the floor, talking to your staff. The best commanders know their teams, certainly specialist commanders who do counterterrorism, public order, firearms, investigators. They will know their teams. They are certainly not hung up about rank or title. They will take advice freely. They'll understand that business, but they'll go and speak to everybody all through the event. Walk the floor, walk around the access control points, look at it, share information, and try, it's very difficult, never to blame people when things go wrong. Get people to pass problems to you early rather than being scared to talk to you because you're going to bite their head off.
Yeah, very good advice. I know, just scanning some of the chat there's some very good conversations going on, and a number of people a while back on the chat were mentioning the importance of briefings. You know, I say the royal we can spend an awful lot of time putting plans into place and making them all look very pretty and blah blah blah, unless everyone understands the plan and their role in it. You know, that's a great exercise sitting in the office writing a plan, but unless everyone understands how they fit into it and what their responsibilities are, you know, it has the potential to be pretty useless. What would be Pete's top line descriptions of who sits at gold, silver, and bronze commands UK Greenfield events? Tamara is wondering.
Okay, so in the UK, from a police point of view, for a large event such as D-Day 75 at gold level, there would be a chief officer. So normally in the provincial forces, an assistant chief constable. I should say though, but it's role not rank in most cases, but political. For your royal weddings, for your Olympic Games, for your President Trumps, it's generally going to be an assistant chief officer. So equating to private or your field, it's going to be a chief executive officer. He or she will have a strategic team around them and a strategic coordination group. At the event management safety officer role, there will be what we call a silver commander. In the UK, it's referred to as tactical. The rest of the world, it's operational. But at the tactical level, again, not rank, not role. They do a range of courses, and they will be coordinating, planning, and commanding the events. And then our bronze commanders, the operational levels, are generally first or second line supervisors who have done the appropriate training, and they have a geographic or functional command. And they will patch in across at all levels. It works really well when you can go to an incident and talk to the fire chief, the ambulance chief, you know, embed our JSIP principles, but also talk the same language with you and the professors out there and all the event organizers. So generally 3 layers. If you want to remember it quickly: strategy, what we're going to do; silver, tactics, how we do it; do it. So if you grab me in an elevator and ask that question, I'd say, right, strategy, what we're going to do; silver, this is how we do it; and bronze, go and do it.
Yeah, I think that's
all of those. There were, you know, several weeks of courses.
Distilled down into 7 seconds of a soundbite. I'm going to suggest that if anyone has any burning questions left, see, my earpiece keeps falling out because my rugby ears don't really work with them well. I have a pair of them, Pete, and I just forgot to bring them to the office. Anyone has any burning questions, please throw them in the chat or raise your hand to speak. I've turned on that functionality. I think we're dribbling towards getting this, wrapping this one up. Someone did mention, I was trying to find it there, but I did read it as it passed me by in the chat, about just on the discussion around code words, that there's always the likelihood that then the police or whoever will turn up and be using the ones they're used to anyway. I think Pete's point is that for an event of a certain scale where all the right people are around the table, very early doors, you should be getting agreement on what is being used. And, you know, maybe it will be the police ones or whatever, but that the point is everyone agrees early what's being used. So in an incident, you don't have people landing in with all their different code words and confusing one another.
No, and also the three-letter acronyms, the TLAs. We are the worst offenders in the blue light services. Every trade or profession has it. We do a standard sketch joke on the Interpol courses where I do a whole plan in about 35 TLAs, and it's just madness. So the thing there is, if I start using TLAs or Mark starts using those, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
what does that mean? Yeah.
Yep. People can often forget that the whole point is to communicate information. And while in your everyday role in the police, they are beneficial to communicating information because everyone has a shared understanding, everyone knows exactly what they mean. But sometimes you have to recognize you're in a different room, you have a different audience, and the priority is still to convey information. So maybe the TLAs aren't going to work as well in that room. And I think it's just being able to step out. And I think, seeing as you've said it, I'm allowed then say it. We often do find that it is the police side of things that are intractable in that way. They do find it difficult to let go of the everyday stuff that they do, to fit into something that's slightly different, but again, fairly critical that they do slot in properly to it.
And another thing that is getting better, but unless you have a foot in both camps, it can be challenging, is I think the police service is slower at recognizing the professional skill set, and certainly in some cases the more professional skill set of private professionals than the other way around. And so I'm finding myself pushing through Interpol more strongly to get curricular content for all of us to train together, because I think it's because of the mentality of police, firearms and military. We're just commanders, we know best, but actually we don't. Go back as far as Hillsborough, we don't know the best all the time, so there's still gaps to work together, a bit like we're doing today.
Yeah, no, but I think you're right, though. I think it's fair to say that that's probably the state of play. But I think if we're all being honest, I know definitely in the UK and Ireland we've seen it, that it is changing slightly, and the industry and professionals in the private sector who do this all the time are starting to kind of be accepted more as exactly that, as professionals. I guess the difference is, again, as you say, we all know within things like the police and emergency services, where things tend to be based on rank, people rise through the ranks, not necessarily always on ability. So you can have someone who you kind of have to listen to who may not really know what they're talking about on a particular subject. And that's, I think, where the frustration on our side can sometimes lie. I have to say, in Ireland, the relationship we have with An Garda Síochána here with the police is largely really, really good. And a lot of them very much understand, especially in areas that have, local authority areas that have events quite regularly. And when you're working closely with them, they get quite quickly that you know what you know, they know what they know, and if we all work together, we get a really successful, safe event.
Never let the AGS take you for a wee drink, though.
There's no such thing as a wee drink here, especially if the AGS take you. Sometimes it's good politics to say yes, though. I think we're probably good. No burning questions, as Pete said, and knowing Pete, I know he means it, folks. So if you do have something, that you want to ask and maybe didn't want to ask on the webinar, genuinely, Pete will come back to you. He's a bit like me, except he doesn't use the bad language I use. When I say, if I don't know the answer, I won't bullshit you, but it'll annoy me and I'll go and find the answer. So please do get in touch with Pete. His email was there on the slides. You'll find him very easily on LinkedIn. He's quite active. And again, pick his brain. He thinks like a lot of the rest of us do around, knowledge sharing and not working in silos and trying to bridge these gaps that exist between people that do different functions that need to dovetail well. Otherwise, these massive events we all love working on, or smaller events we all love working on, they can't happen as well or as safely without us all talking. So do and keep track of when Pete does webinars and provides opportunities for other through other people and with Chris Kemp and MOM and stuff like that. So touch base with him, ask him the questions. Like I said, he does. I've had people come back and go, "Oh, that was really nice. Pete gave me an answer on that." I've picked his brain a lot over some work we're doing too. So he's good for that. A lot of people say they're good for that and aren't. I have found that Pete is quite good. So that's enough smoke from me blowing up your backside. I'm just sorry.
No, and thanks.
No questions, so I think we're good.
Mark, it'll be wrong for me not to thank you for the work you've been doing in coordinating these seminars. It's been a delight to take part and support. I learn so much every time. Normally, when I'm listening, I enjoy doing the chat room and making contacts. I think it's fantastic. Long may it continue, but you've set this up. You've done the planning for it. So thank you for hosting today. And it's been an absolute pleasure. So well done.
Super, I appreciate that. And one thing I've always said, and this counts towards you as well as our other presenters, is none of us are precious. We all recognize that sometimes a lot of the value people are getting are through their own conversations in the chat. And if this is providing a platform for people in the chat to debate and everything, that's perfect too. I'm just happy that at least 2 people are in a room getting to discuss and talk about events when most of us can't really be active on them. So again, anything we can do that helps that, I think is worthwhile. So I think I'm going to wrap it up and close the room so no one get annoyed with me when they get kicked out. Pete, thank you very much for this. I think we all got good value out of it. Thank you to everyone in the room for joining us. If you're coming to Tuesdays, which I suggest you do, because I know Alan, who I think is still in the room, has put an awful lot of work and effort into putting a presentation together for Tuesday. Personally, I'm really looking forward to it. It's around event management plans and developing them in pictures. That's the kind of the broad topic. And I know it's going to be a really good one. So if you're not signed up for that, consider it. That's on Tuesday morning. And have a great weekend. And we'll talk to you soon.